Adam, welcome back, my man.
Thanks for having me, Aubrey.
So it was really a pretty compelling story that you told me at the MAPS science conference when I was there. And, because previously we were talking about mushrooms. And at that point, I don't think you'd tried ayahuasca yet.
I hadn't.
So
No. Sorry. When we last time,
the last podcast,
Yeah.
I don't think you had.
I hadn't.
And then at MAPS, you're like, hey, man.
Right. I have some stories for you.
Some stories. I did some shit. I had some ayahuasca. And for those of you who don't know, even though I talk about it all the time, ayahuasca is a psychedelic plant medicine indigenous to the jungles of particularly South America, some in Central America, combining a very high DMT containing combination of plants, usually chacaruna or opiaje or wambisa, but it has a high DMT containing set of plants, leaves, and then the bark of the ayahuasca vine, which makes it orally active. They brew it into a tea and they sing some icaros, and it's quite an intense ceremonial experience, probably one of the most intense experiences you can dial in. And you had the opportunity to go dive in and do that. And what happened, good friend?
Well, I saw the ultimate truth. I can't tell you. You're not initiated enough, but, I've got it, man. I've got it.
Thank you for tuning in to the Aubrey Marcus Podcast. And there we go. Go drink it for yourself and find out on your own, kids.
This is a side note, but I did have an experience years and years ago on 5-MeO-DMT where the end of that experience was like, oh, I've seen it all. Now the universe is over. Like such an egotistical view of losing your ego, It's like, I'm everything, but now everything will cease to exist since I've figured out the riddle.
So now that I am God, all differentiation can all go away.
All of the props and, and side characters and sidekicks, you guys can all clock out.
So that wasn't the final truth.
That was not, no, right. Well, then after that, this is like 2010. I was like, it's all over. And then bang, I'm back on my couch sitting. Again, that's 5-MeO-DMT. I don't want to confuse people with too many DMT
so
variants.
5-MeO-DMT is particularly extracted from the bufo toad.
Yes.
And it can also be found in plants. It's in Vilca, which is another ceremonial compound, but it's mixed with a lot of stuff. But pure 5-MeO-DMT, I did a podcast on that too, is one of the most remarkable experiences in the world. But it's not ayahuasca.
It's not ayahuasca. So
let's talk about ayahuasca first. And if we want to go into DMT.
If we wander too much into other psychedelics.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, it actually started, I had all these experiences that we talked about last time where I was trying to cure my, at that time, very severe OCD with psychedelics. And I read a study that showed mushrooms had efficacy, and I went on this whole quest.
Give us a little flavor of your OCD. What was the weirdest, kinkiest little OCD thing you would do?
So my OCD was, and to some extent is, I go back and forth. Do I have OCD? I can kind of have OCD about that question. It's a lot better, but I still do get trapped sometimes. I can still sometimes get enslaved because I do view it as an addiction. Ultimately, it's an attempt to avoid pain that creates more pain, which drives you engaging in the behavior even more to try to eliminate it. It's kind of that noose tightening, which I think is so characteristic of so many human behaviors. I mean, you can see that with substances clearly, but relationships, work.
Yeah. Like how many times I've created so much pain for myself to give myself just the distance between me and my partner because of the fear of potential pain of losing her. But in the meantime, I'm constructing these elaborate, ideas and extrapolations about how terrible everything is and suffering and sitting them in there to prevent the smallest, amount of pain of rejection from her.
There's something, with OCD particularly, but I think it is universally human, the pain that we perceive that we're controlling or creating is somehow less terrifying than the unknown.
Yeah.
There's a guy who does monologues. He died actually, suicide, Spalding Gray. And he had a line in one of his monologues. He said, "I like to create my own hells so the real ones can't get me." And that's always rung very true to me. And OCD is kind of the zenith of that, or the nadir, depending, but where
that was a new vocabulary word. Is the opposite of zenith is the
nadir, is the low point. Yeah.
Ooh, how many people knew that? Show of hands.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you look into the camera for that?
I did. Yeah.
For sure.
I've
got my own too. Yeah. But because OCD, it's like well, you take the classic example of hand washing, which was not my form. I'll tell you about mine in a moment. But someone is afraid they're contaminated in some way, so they'll wash their hands repeatedly for hours. And the pain that they're causing by that behavior is much worse than the anxiety of, oh, I'm contaminated, because now they're missing their lives. They get fired from their job. Their partners leave them. Your life falls apart. So it's this attempt to control fear that actually creates much more fear and suffering.
I had a recognition about that hand washing that, I have like a hand sanitizer, and I pretty much just use it before I eat.
Yeah.
But I do that, and I was recognizing that, anything that you do out of fear is bound in that fear. Like the act itself is like bound in fear.
Yeah.
Right. And so you like bear the residue of doing something
Because
that's bound in fear.
It has that energy, you mean,
It
to
has
it
that
when
energy
you're doing
to
it.
it. Yeah. It's like it's co-opted with the action. So the action contains the energy of the action itself. So if you do something in love, it's bound in love. If you do something in joy, it's bound in joy. If you do something in fear, it's bound in joy. So I was literally thinking like, oh, here I am squirting fear on all over my
Gel
hands
fear.
and rubbing it in so I can swallow it later.
Yeah.
And there is some, like, I guess if my hands were really fucking dirty and I was on like airport, handrails and I was a little run down, that makes sense. But the research behind actually having some immune stressors as a hormetic stressor and getting some dirt and getting some things actually in your body is actually strengthening. So it's something I'm definitely working on and mindful of, like, okay, do I need the hand sanitizer now, or am I good? And am I just washing my hands in fear?
Well, since you brought it up, let's break it down a little bit more, though. I'm guessing when you engage in that hand washing, when that sanitizing, there is probably some payoff in the moment. Maybe if there like a little bit of anxiety before, like, it's probably better safe than sorry.
Yeah,
You
for
do it
sure.
and you feel a little bit better for
sure. Well, and then there's probably the moderate amount of, like, oh man, what did I touch? What did I touch before? So a lot of uncertainty. The uncertainty, like, am I forgetting a filthy door handle, or did I, blah,
so
blah,
better
blah.
safe than sorry.
Better safe than sorry to some degree. But again, like that general sense of fearlessness and the loss of that anxiety is probably going to strengthen my immune system more than my, kind of ideas in my head that I have to go back and try and put together every place that my hands had touched and make a judgment call based on whether I need this or not need this. If I had just that greater sense of confidence and the greater sense of freedom that even if I did get sick, that it would be okay and I wouldn't be not worthy of love because I wasn't productive. And it goes fucking deep, Adam.
Right.
It goes deep.
Well, we have, I don't know, 800, 900 grains. So
yeah.
But well, and I think it kind of ties in. I mean, you talk about this a little bit in your book, the idea, and actually a new show I'm working on deals with this too, where I feel like we evolve for a very different environment than the one we find ourselves in. We evolved for an environment where most threats really were existential threats. It wasn't like, oh, I might get a little bit sick and I won't be as productive. It was, shit, I'm going to get eaten.
Yeah.
And so I think I mean, I don't base this on, I haven't done any research to back this up, but it often feels to me like these threats. So, all right, my OCD was, and when it happens, because it does still sometimes happen, is it revolves around decision making. So I can get very fixated on making the right choice. It can be quite trivial. It's gotten a lot better. So, but at my worst, I could spend an hour picking out a shirt to wear. And then I came up with the solution for this, which is, all right, what's my best shirt? Get 10 copies of that shirt. That solution worked for a week or two, but then the shirts were no longer precisely identical because some had been worn. They had different wrinkles. So it's like you just go down the rabbit hole. I would get trapped deciding what subway line to take in New York, what side of the street to walk down. Do I want sunshine or do I want to be walking through trees? Just every decision.
Wow.
And interestingly, I was not born with OCD. I think some people are, but most people who I speak to are not. For me, I was born, I would say, with a lot of anxiety, some perfectionistic tendencies that manifested in different ways throughout my life and caused quite a lot of suffering. I was hospitalized twice when I was 18 and 19, but it didn't flower, if that's sort of has a positive connotation, but I'll go with it. It didn't flower into this sort of full-blown OCD until I had a very significant romantic relationship end. And the way I look at it now is my heart was broken. I wasn't willing to feel that. So I just went up to my head and was like, all right, let me just figure everything out so I don't have to feel this loss.
Yeah.
If I can just make the right decision in every moment, I'll have the perfect life.
I could have prevented this with the right shirt.
Right. It wasn't literally that, but it was like, it did have an element of that almost magical thinking.
Yeah.
This idea that, if I just, because, people say life is about decisions, but I'd go a step further. I would say life actually is decisions. I think that is, on a very basic level, what our existence is we're constantly making choices. And that does determine the course of our life in some sense. I mean, it's kind of the cosmic joke. I believe we have free will. We have total freedom to take any action in any moment. Maybe not any action, but an infinite number of actions. You can be strapped down in a gurney and there's still an infinite number of things you can do.
Mm-hmm.
So we have that freedom, but the results of our actions are unknown and unknowable. And I think that's the root cause of a lot of human suffering and a lot of anxiety. This illusion of control that comes from the fact that we can choose what to do, but we don't know the outcome.
But I think that's also the radical appeal.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's a movie that you've already seen.
Right.
Because if you know all possible outcomes, like every game has that random element, whether it's a video game, you don't know when the monsters are going to come. You don't know what the boss is going to look like. You don't know how you're going to have to adapt. Like you pick up something, I got this new sword that has a special power. And then you find the enemy that actually allows you to, use that sword with that special power, whether it's another game, a game of chance or a game of, where you're competing against an opponent who also has free choice, whether that's chess or poker. Everything has that element, even the things that within the larger game of life, the macro game, the micro games, we always create the same thing too. You know? I mean, it is what makes the thing most exciting. But it is interesting to reflect upon the fact that that is the nature of our reality. We have an infinite number of choices, and then we do our best to hypothesize all the possible outcomes. But that can be a true pathway to hell if all you're doing is living in this premeditation world where you're trying to figure out how every single thing you do is going to affect every other person and what their actions are going to be, but they have free will. So there's a whole spectrum. And then you start getting in probabilities and percentages and trying to figure it out. And then your fear kicks in and you're like, fuck it, I'm just going to take the worst case scenario and live that.
Yep.
So that way that I'm like at least living the worst so I won't be disappointed. And then you're fucking unhappy.
And that was my life for a decade, really.
Right,
that was
good.
in a nutshell. It was you summed it up perfectly. Just every eventuality, every contingency, I had to figure it all out to decide what fucking subway line to take.
Yeah.
And it was paralyzing, and it took me out of life. And I, saw all sorts of specialists, tried all the medications, nothing helped. And then I read this scientific study where they found that mushrooms had some efficacy. And I had very little psychedelic experience at that point, but it was kind of like, what do I have to lose? So that was years ago.
And you told that story on the first podcast. So people who want to dive deeper into the mushroom cure.
Yeah. You said, sorry.
You did tell that story on the first podcast. So anybody who wants to dive deeper in
you can listen to that one.
Listen to that one and listen how mushrooms helped cure your OCD. Well, at least temperate.
They definitely did. There's been significant gains, and those gains have built over time. I mean, I'd say this. For a decade, most of the hours in my day were spent on OCD. I mean, it's tragic, but true. Now, most days I have no OCD. I'd say most weeks I have no OCD, but it does flare up sometimes. And when it flares up, I'm still its bitch. It can still take me over. But I have tools to get out of it relatively quickly. It rarely takes over for more than a few hours, never for more than a day or two.
I'd say that with, kind of I've always had, on and off depression.
Yeah.
And not I wouldn't say it ever been severe, but it's been there.
Yeah.
And I think as time has gone on, the tools increase, the understanding increase, the feeling of hopelessness, which I think is a kind of rooted and co-opted into the idea of depression itself. Like that has been diminished significantly because I do feel I have tools. I do feel I understand the truth of who I am. And like a lot of other things are sorted. So those moments tend to be more fleeting. And I tend to have like, okay, here we are. And then I actually had a little episode come out of the blue at about midnight on Monday. And I had to stay up till 2:30 and like track it. And it was like a fucking Native American tracker, just sniffing all the trails. Like, where are we? What is this? Why am I feeling this? Where is and looking for where the kind of hopelessness, where all these other kind of things, these scents that I know. And I was able to it took me 2.5 hours, but I was able to really unravel it at about 2 and then really work through it by 2:30 and kind of get the answers and then ease off into bed. But it's interesting. It's not like it's gone,
Yeah.
but like I can see it, feel it, taste it, track it, be aware of it, resolve it, and, kill it in a night rather than have it wake up the next day and however many days it used to take.
Right. And I would say I'm sort of projecting my own experience, but I wonder, you tell me, is the change that now instead of, because when it perpetuates day after day, it's because for me, I'm avoiding. So it sounds like what you did instead is you kind of dove into it. All right, what's going on here? You had you didn't identify with it fully because you kind of see it, like you said, track it. And then when you found whatever this root cause was, you dove into it. I'm curious, you said you kind of resolved it. What did you actually do to resolve it? Was it?
Well, I had to find out where the fundamental root cause is. And, I share everything on this, so I can go into that exactly. So I just had my Aubrey Marcus weekend, which is my kind of transformational coaching program. And there was certainly some exhaustion because I really fucking put in an immense amount of hours and time. But I think what I noticed was that there was some special people in the crowd, my fiance being one and a couple other people. And there was some aspect of what I was doing that was not dedicated entirely to the moment of what I was doing and the service of, because really I'm there to be of service, right? But like there was times where I was trying to impress people, and like that, and I remember a couple moments where like during even a live podcast, I looked over and I like would look and see if someone was paying attention, and those moments when I'm really and I'm building this mastermind called Fit for Service, and I'm really dedicating myself of like being
I've been following
being that is truly of service. And I think it's really testing me because in that instance, instead of being completely of service, even though my actions and my speech and everything in my podcast was ultimately of service, the why I was doing it was mixed.
Yeah.
And it was mixed between doing it to be of service and also trying to impress somebody for my own personal gain or favor or validation or some other thing. And it just felt kind of like gross and it felt kind of impostery. And I was maybe a little ashamed of it in the moment. And so I didn't look at it. And then it just kind of built and hid and became this like little depression that I had to work out. It's like, why was I feeling that way about the weekend? And I thought about a couple moments where I was doing things that had personal motivations and personal gains when they really shouldn't. And when I'm at my best and giving a speech or doing something, I divorce myself from all concerns like that. I'm just really in the moment. Even if I was fucking playing basketball and I'm looking up at somebody in the crowd like, oh man, she's watching me. I better do good. I'm going to fucking airball, I'm going to miss the shot.
Yeah.
It fucks up your performance and it also fucks up, kind of the identification with who I am and who I'm working to be to the fullest extent, and so I think for me, it was really just tracking that down and then also recognizing that there was some areas of judgment of other people that I was still carrying. And as you judge others, you judge yourself.
Yep.
So as Paul Selig says, you can't you can't put someone in the cave of your judgment without leading them down there with your hand.
Yeah.
So I was also judging myself because I was judging some other people I know. And I was like, oh, and so I sent a couple text messages out being, just expressing love. And I actually apologized even for thoughts in my head, even though they weren't even aware of it. And people were like, whoa.
Yeah.
Like you're apologizing for things that you thought. And I'm like, yeah, sorry. Cause I was like not singing your song. I was not holding you in the highest light in my mind. And I'm aware of that. And I don't know, obviously you don't know that in the physical, but maybe you felt that in this kind of collective consciousness or whatever. Like
I'm sort of,
So that was like that was a little 2.5 hour journey of like a little tune up that the depression was letting me know like, hey man, something's fucked up here, and then I got the opportunity for the tune up and it worked.
That's remarkable though, because it sounds like the depression had a specific message for you.
It did.
Yeah.
It did.
And you had the tools and the willingness to hear that message and actually implement behavior that to try to correct it.
I guess to stick with it and because the first hour and a half I was coming up with nothing.
Yeah.
I was like,
you're just really like
inquiring
inquiring,
and like, is that it? And like, no. is that it? No. So it was interesting, but I stuck with it long enough and it started to just really crystallize and I started to get it.
What I love about that is, well, first of all, it undercuts this whole idea of mental illness, quote unquote, being this chemical thing that you have to just chemically rectify.
Right.
Versus, I think, the more traditional view, which I subscribe to, which is that, yeah, there's information in these states. There's a reason, there's a narrative there, and uncovering that can actually inform us in ways that can help our growth and help us serve others.
Yep.
But I also really relate to this whole, shit, even now, if I'm going to call it out, there's a little part of my brain that's like, how am I doing in this podcast? And,
right.
And that is, as a performer, it's poison, but it's a poison I still ingest small doses of almost every night on stage. I have not fully transcended it. And I think it's part of the reason I still like performing, ironically, is because it forces me to confront this thing that doesn't just happen on stage. It happens in my life in a lot of ways, this desire to win people over.
Yeah.
And it stems from, and you've talked about this in some of your recent emails, it stems from this, I want other people to tell me I'm okay because at some level, I don't believe I'm okay.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, that external validation to buttress your own feelings about who you are and your own worthiness. That's probably one of the most universally applicable things that people do, and I think we've tried to like stabilize those points of validation, but as soon as we like fixate them on one person, like you probably did with the ex that broke up with you, there was a massive amount of validation on her part. And as soon as you make any one person's validation of you special, it's like having an undiversified wealth money account. You know what I mean? Like that one stock can crash and your whole thing is fucked. So like a strategy one is like, okay, at least spread it out.
Right.
Be mindful of how special you're making any one person's thing. Spread it out to your community, to your tribe. I think that's why having, a community around you is so important. And I think intentionally spreading that out. And then eventually the final move, the ultimate move is to not need validation at all. But I think it goes in a couple stages. One, being mindful of the specialness. Maybe your parents have a special amount of validation. Maybe your spouse has a special amount of validation. All these people have these inordinate special amounts that actually can throw you off completely. So like spreading that out a little bit and recognizing all your friends and all the people who are your soul family. Like allow yourself to take that in and then eventually work on just understanding that you don't need any of that because you truly do know who you are.
And I think I'm maybe worse, to put a value judgment, than you are, because for me, it's not just people who I care about and love. It's at some level, and I became aware of this on a deeper level recently, actually as a result of a low-dose LSD trip. But it's like, I want to win over everyone all the time. It really is that bottomless. And maybe that's why I'm a performer. That's why I need to go up.
I hear you, man.
Yeah. I'll talk briefly about this trip because it does kind of fit in with what we're talking about, where it was a family vacation. And family for me is my parents, my siblings, both of whom are married with kids, and then me, who I don't have a partner right now. But I do feel a lot of love from the family. We're very close. We really enjoy each other's company. We were in this beautiful location in Maine. And I'd planned, all right, one day I'm going to I tend to have a high tolerance to psychedelics, probably because I was on antidepressants for so long. I've been off for a long time, but there's some residual tolerance. So I was going to do one tab of strong LSD on my own one day and go hiking. That day came. I want to tell this. I'll abbreviate the story. But there was a huge blowout with my family about something trivial. Fuck it, I'll tell you what it was. There weren't enough eggs for me for breakfast that morning, and it caused, and I reverted, man. I kind of had I was like, I need these eggs, and then my sister's like, I'll go buy eggs, but it was 30 minutes. I was like, don't buy eggs for me, and it turned into, we all rewound 30 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that hasn't happened in many years. I have a good relationship with a really good relationship with the family, but it was like, me starting to throw a temper tantrum, my siblings trying to diffuse it, and the shame I felt, just this thick syrup of just self-loathing. And probably the right thing to do then, setting with psychedelics is, okay, I'm not going to take LSD alone, but I was like, fuck it. I planned it for this day. So I took my supposedly double strength gel tab, went hiking, and not surprisingly, the disgust and the self-loathing and, and very quickly I kind of inquired and I was like, all right, well, I feel like I'm 12 years old again, and making my mom cry. I'm a bad kid. I'm causing all this strife in my household because I did have a very fraught relationship growing up. I was an intense kid, and I think my parents did their best with me, but I was a handful.
Yeah.
So all of that just coming up and just feeling like I can't live with myself. I can't live with myself right now. And then I went in more deeply and I was like, well, what do I want in this moment? And I realized, well, I want forgiveness, for my family. But then I realized, well, they actually did all forgive me. They saw how upset I was, and they all did forgive me. And what do they want from me now? They want me to actually feel well in this moment. So I have that. And it's a cliche, but what I ultimately came down to is, what I really want is for myself. I want to forgive myself.
Yep.
I want to accept myself.
Yep.
And in that moment, I realized I was withholding that from myself because I'd been a bad kid.
Yeah, that shame and the guilt and the self-punishment of the judge, which is this certain element of the ego which doles out, our ability to be happy or our punishment and our, sentence of suffering and sadness until we've somehow redeemed ourselves with our own pound of emotional flesh that we've paid the old gods to redeem ourselves for this horrible action that we had, when really it's all bullshit.
Yeah.
We're just learning. We're just doing our best and learning. And all of those times we spent punishing ourselves are just building deeper patterns, deeper fear, more shame, more resentment, because shame came up for you probably the minute you started having that emotional reaction, because that allowed you to blind yourself towards what you were doing and probably double down on the justification for why you needed eggs and why this was bullshit, because you were somehow already immediately shame started to cloud you and say, no, keep going.
Yeah.
Like, don't really look at what's going on here. Like, just double down and
that
have
same
it
addictive pattern.
Yeah, have it make
go,
sense. Have it make sense in your mind, and that way you can keep going and fuel it. But yeah, exactly. And then but that, as soon as that lifts and that veil, and then you do have the awareness, then the only path is, like you said, forgiveness and whatever remediations you need to do externally, and that honest vulnerability. Like, hey, fuck, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But I'm really learning, and I don't know how long it's going to take me to learn. You don't need to overpromise anything. Be like, I'm still really learning. Obviously, still got a lot of shit to learn.
Yeah.
And those moments are important, because I think one mistake I've made in my relationship with Whit is I'll learn something once and I'll be like, nah, babe, I got this. Don't worry about it. I got this, and then like it comes up again and she's like, what the fuck, man? I thought you had this. I was like, yeah, me too. I thought I did. And that'll just double the guilt, because it's like,
you should have figured it out by now.
Yeah. Not only did I,
you do know better.
Not only did I do that thing again, but I also promised her that I wouldn't do that thing again. So not only am I doing it, which is annoying, but I'm lying, and like breaking a promise, which is like a double thing. But just knowing like, hey, I'm learning and I really am doing my best to learn. And I don't know how long exactly it's going to take me to learn this, but I'm learning every time. And that's a lot more stable thing to say, rather than this kind of over-promising remediation. And these like extremes that we
I'm a new man.
I'm a new man.
Yeah.
I'll never drink again. Like it's that classic Sunday afternoon with the hangover. Like, I'm done drinking.
Yeah.
That's it. And then 2 weeks later, you're just drinking again.
Yeah. Yeah. No, the shame is a strong thing. And then from that moment, realizing, literally on this mountaintop with this, wow, I'm withholding this from myself. Well, can I give that to myself? And I think I did. Maybe not 100%, but being like, yeah, you know what? There's some old patterns that got kicked up, and I got lost in them, and that's okay. My family still loves me. I still love them, and I'll continue to try to see this. But then from that, it spread, and I realized, you know what? I have this with everyone all the time at some level. I mean, it's my fucking Uber driver over here. There's this little part of me that, and sometimes not a little part of me, that really wants to win people over so they can tell me I'm
with your
okay.
2-star Uber rating, obviously you're not
right.
doing a very good job. Just kidding. He doesn't have a 2-star Uber rating.
But anyway, you had asked about ayahuasca. We've already talked about multiple other substances. But yeah, so tying it in. So the OCD is a lot better, but I'm still human, and I still have, certainly perfectionism is still a problem for me, which I kind of associate with OCD, but even on its own, it's something that I struggle with.
Yep.
Rigidity, wanting things to be a certain way, all these kind of OCD tendencies are still there, and they're deep. And so I hadn't tripped, had really strong trips for a while. The time of the mushroom cure, I was doing a lot of psychedelics, high doses. I kind of got what I needed and I stepped away. Mm-hmm. But I read the research that comes out and these incredible results. And I felt like, all right, I'd like to do some sort of guided journey. But I wouldn't qualify for any of the studies right now. So it seemed like the next best thing was going to be ayahuasca, having some sort of, facilitator there. So I did it in New York. I wound up having 4 journeys over the course of 2 months, basically every other week in New York. And it was intriguing. There was nothing that was like, there were no massive epiphanies, but I had one experience in particular where I was just feeling this tremendous wave of fear lying in this yoga studio in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, and just feeling like, man, why am I tripping again? My life is going well. I've fucked up everything. Now I'm going to pay for this, and just terror. But I had enough presence of mind from past psychedelic experiences. My mantra when shit gets really wonky is breath. Just breathe.
Yep.
Breathe.
Yep.
Just
That's
breathe.
Your
so
anchor back to home.
yeah.
Always.
And I started breathing in a way, I don't know if I've ever breathed this way before. It wasn't even like diaphragmatic breathing. It was my whole body was breathing. It felt like every cell in my body was taking in oxygen.
Yeah, you can actually take in oxygen through your sphincter. No.
I was like, why isn't this in the book, man? And anyway, and the reason I bring this up, so the fear, I wouldn't even say the fear passed. I was just kind of breathing into the fear for the next 2 hours of this experience. And, then the experience ended. But the remarkable thing about this is my breathing stayed different for months afterwards. I was still breathing on a much deeper level. So I was like, all right, there's something to this ayahuasca stuff. But doing it in a yoga studio in Brooklyn and then taking an Uber home at 3 a.m. did not feel like the right way to do it. So I went to Peru.
Especially because you're stressed about
my Uber rating.
driver.
I know. I'm like, man, I cannot afford another 1-star Uber rating. I got to win this guy over. Let me have my best material ready.
Yeah.
All right, his name's Mohammed. He's probably from this country. Let me do some Wikipedia. What are some of the issues?
Give him a free Sudoku on the way, just in case.
So yeah, I had an opportunity. I had a couple of weeks. I didn't have anything booked. I was like, all right, let me go down to Peru. And initially, I went to a place called Niue Rao, a few hours outside of Iquitos. And
Pucallpa?
Sorry,
It's in Pucallpa?
It's in the Iquitos area, but it's it's a couple of hours boat and moto taxi. It's Non-Champa is the town.
Non-Champa.
I use the word town loosely. It's maybe 80 people there. And already going in, it was like, as I'm on the moto taxi, I'm like, you know what? I can still back out, man. I can still back out. It was like Peru Airlines or whatever had lost my bag, and I was like, all right, well,
that's a sign.
I can't, without my contact lens solution, I can't. Just all the I mean, I think for me, I don't think I've ever gone into a psychedelic experience without some measure of fear.
Sure.
And so I'd committed to 6 ceremonies over 10 nights, and I wound up, and it was none of them were easy, but the experience in a nutshell, and I can tell you about this one we talked a little bit about, where I had the classic "I'm definitely dying" experience, but I was getting a lot out of it. But I didn't have any visions, not one vision. For me, it largely was physical. It was a physical experience. I think it was my second ceremony, and we're in the Maloka, pitch dark. I'm sure you've had that moment. They blow out the candle, silence before the Icaros start. your senses are heightened, so you can hear every creak of the person next to you, every hoot of whatever animal is outside, and just that growing, creeping sort of ayahuasca in your, and I'm in that state, and some worry came up. I don't remember what the worry was, and I started going into it in my head. What am I going to do about X? And I'm going deeper and deeper into it. And then I had a moment where I realized, wait, I'm literally in this position, that sort of stereotypical position of anguish. I was holding my hand in my head in my hands. And I had the thought, some might say it was the ayahuasca speaking to me, my subconscious, who knows. But the thought was very clear. It was, before you try to figure out whatever you're trying to figure out in your brain, just stop doing this. Just relax your body. Let your hands drop to your side and relax your body. And that was, in different variations, that was a lot of my experience over. I wound up staying longer, doing 10 ceremonies over 16 nights. Was just, all right, the shit going on here, is it stuff that you actually have to figure out now? No? Well, then just come back to the present. It was very meditative for me.
Yeah. There's so much wisdom in that, because they can actually do studies, saliva tests and blood tests of people who are in different postures, and different postures change your hormonal, structure. So like certain postures will release more testosterone. Just putting your arms back in a confident position where you're like, yeah, here I am, and whoa, knock that thing over. But yeah, confident enough position to knock over all your camera equipment.
I'm doing so well in life. I don't need this $10,000 camera. Fuck,
I don't need
this.
But yeah, that position on its own will increase testosterone, and like other different positions will decrease stress. And I think that's something that one of my good friends, Aaron Alexander, talks about a lot. And he's a movement specialist, but how the body kind of mirrors the emotional state, and the emotional state kind of mirrors the body. So we're in this hunched protective state. Our neurochemistry is going to be hunched and protective, to the extent that it can be. So the cortisol production, the norepinephrine production, all of these things affected by our physicality. So that's a really good insight, so when you're clenching and balled up, and then if you can just relax that, and especially change your breathing too, because deep belly breathing, immediately starts lowering cortisol, immediately starts lowering all of these stress markers in the body. So again, those two lessons, like, hey, Adam, anchor to your breath. Hey man, put yourself in a positive physical posture, and it'll change your actual algorithm of the body itself.
And yet I've been in probably, let's see, quick math. I mean, thousands of therapy sessions in my life. And not once has a therapist walked in and seen me hunched over and said, hey, just let your shoulders go. Straight.
And that's fucking crazy.
Because
crazy. It's like all of these schools of thought and wisdom are so siloed.
We're such a brain society, and Western psychology it's a brain science. And I'll put science in very heavy air quotes there, because I feel like there's a lot of bullshit in psychology and psychiatry. But
yeah, well, and also like I mean, I talk about the statistics in my book, but they're talking about over half of all medical visits are stress related. Yeah. And like fucking 20% of doctors actually feel equipped to discuss stress management techniques with their patients.
And the other statistic is fewer than half of them do them themselves. They don't even know them.
So they're not doing them themselves. They're stressed, not doing them themselves. And they don't even know how to even talk about it, although they know from the literature and research that stress is one of the primary causes that is bringing the patients through the door. It's like, what?
Because the Western medical system didn't evolve for these sort of more holistic practices and insights. And we're paying a massive price for it.
And I think some people expect something different too. Like the expectations of the patient isn't like that you go in to see your doctor in his fucking lab coat with his stethoscope. And he's like, hey, let's work on your breathing. How are you breathing? Let's breathe a little deeper. How's your posture? Let's pull your shoulders back a little bit. Let's relax your neck. Let's get you in a favorable state. And they could trot out and this is what doctors should do. They could trot out all the science and say, look, there's studies that show blah, blah, blah. And that would also make people feel more comfortable.
Right. It's been validated.
It's been validated, like that Japanese study I always talk about where 6 deep breaths starts to change your blood pressure, So when someone tests for high blood pressure, that should be the first fucking thing the doctors say. Like, all right, look, there's some medication options that we have here. But there's a study out of Japan that shows that 6 deep breaths will start to lower your blood pressure. So let's practice some deep breathing techniques and make sure that you're employing those throughout the day to manage some of that element of blood pressure. And then we can talk about nutrition, and then we can talk about the pharmaceutical solutions that are at play. But that ain't what's going on.
Yeah.
Not yet. It
Yeah.
will be at some point, and it is with some doctors.
I mean, part of it is the biggest lobbying by far in the United States is the pharmaceutical industry. They spend orders of magnitude more than even chemical extraction, even more than oil and gas. I don't know if it's billions. I think it is billions, literally billions lobbying. So we have a medical system that has developed in response to legislation that's largely been driven by pharmaceutical company interests.
Yeah. And, I think people hypothesize like a nefarious, fucking like dark, intentional, conspiratorial idea about these pharmaceutical companies. But I worked in biotech for a little while, and they were small companies, mostly trying to do good. But ultimately, they were partnering with some bigger companies. And so I got to go into some of those meetings. Ultimately, what ends up happening is like the organism takes a life of its own. So the corporate organism becomes an actual organism that is actually supporting other organisms, which are humans, that are like cells of the body.
Yeah.
Right. So the cells of the body are supporting the body because the body is keeping the cells alive, feeding them their money and perhaps some validation, whatever. And so the organism itself has this desire to grow, as all organisms do. It's a kind of part in there. It's, if you're not mature, you try to grow. And then when you're grown, you try to survive, and it takes on the same characteristics of a life form. So, and it will do that at the cost of other people or at the cost of other things. It's like if the 2 plants are growing in the jungle, one can and will happily choke out the other plant, so that it can get the sunlight and it can get the water. And it's not that one plant is evil. It's just it has a self-interested motivation. It's not in symbiosis with its environment in some cases, like some strangling vines and certain things. I think collectively it's symbiosis, but nonetheless, I just think that it's not this. I really don't believe that it's this conspiracy. I just think it's like an organism that's a corporate organism that just wants to fucking grow and survive.
I've never heard anyone else articulate it the way you just did, but I actually talk about this in the new show I'm writing, where it's, Mitt Romney, this, presidential candidate in, I think, 2012, he got a lot of flack for saying corporations are people, which is an accepted legal view. And I don't think they're people, but I think they are entities. And if you have enough people who are putting most of their conscious attention day in and day out on this thing, you are giving it effectively life. You're giving it a certain collective force. And the driving force behind capitalism now, it wasn't always this way, is the idea of shareholder returns for the shareholders.
Yeah.
It used to be more being a good corporate citizen. You're going to enrich your employees. You're going to provide value for your customers. You're going to, help the town and or city where you're based. But now it's all about, maximizing shareholder gains. And so if you have, hundreds or thousands, or in some cases, millions of people working for this corporation, and they're all focused on it, and the end point is maximizing profit. Yeah, it's like, it's that is the survival mandate of that entity, and it's going to be fucking ruthless.
Yeah.
And
I think the entities do have a choice to because the executive committee of those entities is the brain. So
Right.
the body has, it's getting competing signals all the time, and the brain kind of can help sort out and decide and use some thought about that. So for example, pathogenic organisms like Candida will send, they're part of the body. So they'll send signals for sugar craving or
to feed themselves. Yeah.
Right. So that
people with late stage HIV have an incredible desire for sex.
Right.
Yeah.
Weird.
Yeah.
It wants to propagate because it's a virus that's a part of a bacteria or a fungus, and it becomes co-opted into the organism. So, but the brain has the ability to kind of sort that out and be like, oh yeah, I see that greedy intention for this element of the organism, which really isn't healthy, and let's make a different choice. And I think that's ultimately what needs to happen, is the consciousness of the decision makers can make different choices. Even though the organism has an imperative to survive, it can say, well, this organism, if it must die because it's hurting all of the environment around it, which will eventually kill the organism plus
Right.
all of the things around it, it doesn't make sense for us to keep this thing alive.
Yeah.
So I think that expansion of consciousness needs to happen for these
Yes.
organisms to change their nature so that they would be willing to say, oh, well, if we can't survive other than being parasitic and vampiric to every organism around us or the collective world at large, then we'd rather die.
And that,
and that would be like, that would be the heroic move of that. But that's hard because then those people might just get weeded out, and the order of the corporation would just be, okay, replace those holistic,
that's a great point.
Kind of people who are interested in the magnanimous decision. Altruistic decision makers. Let's get them the fuck out of here. So it's an interesting thing, especially with a public company, because the public mandates that, and then there's enough. So it's really about not only changing the mandates and the ideas of the management, it's about really changing the ideas and mandates about everybody.
It's culture.
People don't even want stock in that company. People don't even want, and so everything has to adjust.
I think it requires almost everyone to have a more holistic view, to identify less with themselves and more with the whole. And that's, certainly psychedelics can help catalyze that, but there's no guarantee there either. So
it's one of the most reliable ways to get to a state where you feel self with everything around you. Feel self with, the plants and animals around you and the people and the earth and the, expanse of time, the perspective of you, not only in this life, but beyond death, looking back at your life and what you will think. And psychedelics are a real powerful tool to help you with that.
I think they're our best chance.
Yeah.
But I don't think our chances are necessarily spectacular even with them. But I do think they're our best chance because, well, actually, you quoted Pollan in one of your newsletters, and it was one of my favorite quotes in his book, where psychedelics provide a graduate level education in the obvious. And I think we're blinded to so much of the obvious. Everything I could say will sound like a cliche because we all know it, but it doesn't change shit. We're literally poisoning the water we drink. That doesn't seem like a very adaptive strategy. We're destroying the trees that create the oxygen that we need to breathe. We're poisoning the oceans that, without which we can't exist. All this basic, and I'm just focusing on the environmental piece.
Yep.
You can look at it in economic levels, certainly, where there's obvious things that don't work that we blind ourselves to. And that's some of the most, so bring it back to the ayahuasca experience. That's the most obvious thing in the world, that if I'm in a posture like this, I'm not going to be very chilled out. And, but not once in my life, literally not once in my life before that moment was I in the midst of some sort of OCD episode and think, all right, well, what's going on with my body?
Yeah.
This thing that's been here the whole time, not once has that happened until that ayahuasca experience. And now since that experience, that's become a great tool for me. When I do start spinning here, one of the first things I do, not always, but often, is, all right, well, what's going on here? And not always, but often what's going on here is some sort of tension or holding some sort of fight or flight response. And by relaxing that, the obsession may or may not end, but I'm not feeding it more with cortisol and, adrenaline and all this stuff.
What I've really discovered in this is a big discovery, is there's not really a way to ignore or pretend that you're not feeling what you're feeling.
Yeah.
I think there was even some shame around my depression for some periods, so I'd like mask it, pretend it wasn't there, do something chemically to change it, whether that's some alcohol or something. But so you got to remove that, and you got to really identify, become aware, and really embrace the pain of whatever you're feeling. And once you're really aware and full cognitive and somatic awareness of what's going on, and somatic awareness being important,
that's
how
is
your body responding to it, then you start to have the ability to choose your response to that stimulus. And in some cases, there's just pain, and it could be emotional pain. And what I realized is I wasn't very good at, I started embracing the emotional pain, but then I was still exaggerating and adding on and piling on and feeding that flame with my own emotional response and my anger, whatever was
You weren't
coming
making
up.
different choices.
I wasn't
you mean?
really, yeah, I was just like, no, I'm acknowledging my pain, but then I was still like exaggerating the fuck out of it.
Yeah.
Rather than a much more peacefully courageous move, which is like, here is my pain. I'm going to sit with it for a while before I start creating logical structures and edifices that are ultimately founded on emotional extrapolation and bullshit. I'm just going to sit with the actual sensation of my pain, with the sensation of my fear, and just hold it. Hold it. Okay, now what should I do? And like that was just, this is just a real recent, piece of awareness, because I recognize that in certain situations of pain, when I was justified to be angry, I wouldn't just, and I'm not like an aggressive angry person, but I'm like a fucking court attorney angry,
Right.
where I will like put you on trial and put you in a box where you are fucking getting
Bring up
locked up.
PowerPoint presentations.
Exactly. I bring
December
to court. It's up at
17th,
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K.
I can relate.
And fucking, I'll create this scenario.
That
with this
righteous sort of,
righteous, hyper logical
It's-
thing, and I'll create it not only to punish whoever I'm talking to about it, but to punish myself as well, because I'll use their actions to mean things about myself,
Right.
and I'll create my own, court case of how much they
It
don't love me
reinforces
and
who
how
you
much
are,
they don't
yeah.
respect me and blah blah blah. I was still doing that. I've been doing that forever to a certain extent, And I think sometimes I'd try to ignore the emotion, but then it would just kind of build and it would just be festering underneath the surface, and it would pop up in some later date in some later way. So that wasn't working. So I was like, all right, I got to embrace the feeling, but I was still embracing the feeling and then exaggerating and adding on.
Which
to the
I
feeling.
wonder, is that when you say embracing but exaggerating, I wonder, because for me, I can relate to cognitively embracing it, but not being willing to feel it in my body. So I'm still driving it in some way.
Yeah. I mean, I think the embracing means to feel it fully.
Yeah.
You got to
really let it in. Yeah.
Surrender to it.
Yeah.
You got to really, because the resistance to it is also its own form of suffering.
Oh,
The worst part of getting a nose cold is that part where I think it's coming on, because then I'm fucking taking extra supplements. I'm dropping
Right.
oregano oil. I'm pounding this. I'm like, oh, is this happening? Is that, oh, it's fucking happening? And blah, blah, blah. And so it's when I actually have the cold, I'm like, fuck it. I got the cold. So I think when you get to the point where you just accept the pain and be like, oh, okay, I'm feeling jealousy right now. I'm feeling fear right now. Like, where is it? And I'm feeling this completely. And then you'll feel maybe these little urges like, get angry, create distance, keep yourself safe. And like, no. Let's go back to the feeling of fear, feeling of unworthy, feeling of insecurity. And then just sit with that and hold. And it's really powerful how much that can change the collateral damage that you do to yourself and others with just a little bit of courage in the moment to embrace and to hold, before doing anything to kind of collaborate and cooperate with that feeling that you have, and exaggerate. It's just a fucking hold and chill. And I'm assuming that that's something that, for people who suffer from OCD or other thing like that, like there's that initial impulse that creates an action, but probably there's a way to embrace like, oh, wow, here I am. There's fear, there's worry, there's concern about other people's opinions. Like, let me just fucking feel that without doing anything.
That is, you nailed it. I mean, that is, I'm not going to tell the whole mushroom cure here, but that was basically what helped me more than anything with the OCD was the experience I had on more than one trip, mushrooms, but also some other LSD. I had this experience actually on 5-MeO-DMT as well of feeling this overwhelming fear, and instead of trying to fix it with some sort of obsessive thinking, because I couldn't, because I was, zonked out of my mind, opening up to it and letting it in, letting it be there fully. And sometimes it will then transform into something else. Other times it still feels shitty, but at least you're not running or fighting. And once I had that experience on psychedelics of really surrendering to the thing I wanted to avoid, which in a word was fear of making the wrong decision, fear of not getting the love I need, fear of not being good enough, all those fears. Once I let that fear in and felt it, and for me, I generally tend to feel fear right around the heart area, allowing it to be there, allowing it to expand imagining my breath taking it throughout my body. Once I did that, it neutralized the need to engage in obsessive thought and compulsive behavior to try to, I kind of think of it as like, if someone walked into my house and was like, I'm going to punch you in the face, I'd be bobbing and weaving and blocking. But once they hit me, it's going to hurt, but I don't have to worry about avoiding the punch anymore.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And it's really a phantom punch that you're bobbing
right.
and weaving about.
The punch is a lot less painful than
Yeah.
the bobbing and weaving and the frantic, avoiding. And so I understood this intellectually, that acceptance would, because this is a tenet of cognitive behavioral therapy, which I'd done a ton of for the OCD. But understanding acceptance isn't something you can intellectually understand. It's that visceral thing. And so I was only able to actually have the visceral experience of accepting the sensations in my body that I didn't want to be there with psychedelics.
Yeah. You know, my one of my friends and mentors, Ted Decker, I was talking to him about surrender. And he was, recommending surrender as a course of action to some challenging feelings I was feeling in the relationship. And I was like, yeah, surrender. And I was kind of intellectually talking about it. And he could tell, like, he's like, no, man, you know what surrender is? Surrender's when it isn't hard anymore. And I go, oh, okay, yeah, I haven't been doing that, because it's such an acceptance that it may be painful, but it's not hard.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, it is what it is, and it's like a state, it's the resistance that creates the suffering and exaggerates and creates this illusion of movement and control. But like surrender is just, oh no, you're just in it. And it's not that hard. It's when you have the nose cold, and you're like, okay, yeah, I got to blow my nose. It's annoying, but it's not hard.
Yeah.
What's hard is the moments leading up when you're trying to like fight it off and like wondering if you got it and how did I do it? And, judging yourself for not getting enough sleep or like, sharing that drink with someone or whatever the fuck you're doing. And
I think part of this comes back to what we started with, the evolution. We evolved to destroy threats or avoid them, which makes sense when threats are on the outside. If there's a saber-toothed cat chasing you, though they didn't chase. I'm researching a lot of this stuff for my new show. They drop down from trees. But if a huge predator,
terrifying,
it makes sense to fight like hell or run away. But when you're dealing with, when the threat is your own internal sensations or your own thoughts, it does not work. But we don't have, I think, the evolutionary equipment, and we certainly don't have the cultural training, the social training. No one ever told me how to accept my feelings.
Yeah, exactly.
Not once was I ever given
that lesson. You learned a lot of bullshit dates and fucking names and treaties and all kinds of past history
and those
bullshit.
People, by the way, are the people who did fight or flight. They were living. You learn the externals of the world, which is fight or flight is a damn good strategy when you're dealing with real threats on the outside. And it's, I think, the dominant evolutionary programming we have. So to do acceptance and surrender, if a saber-toothed tiger is dropping down on you, opening up to it is not a good survival strategy. But when that saber-toothed tiger is, the thought, I'm not lovable enough, or I've made the wrong decision. So I think I agree. Surrender is easy once you're there. It's not effortful, but it's very hard to peel back the layers of armor and fight and programming that prevent us from getting there.
Yeah. And it's interesting because even if you talk about something, all right, saber-toothed tiger is one example but the release of the obsessive thought actually probably makes you safer, because it definitely makes you a better fighter, right? When you talk to like, or if you look at like the Hagakure, like this, and the Bushido codes of the samurai, like they knew that anybody who flinched at the thought of the horror that might come, the death, the stabbing, the arrows, the whatever may happen to them, they would be more fearful and more vulnerable in battle. So they would meditate obsessively over the ways that they could die, and become aware of that so that they could embrace and kind of surrender to the fact that they were going to die at some point and how they could die. And that would actually allow them to fight more fluidly and fight more heroic. And MMA fighters have the same thing. Like, I listened to John Jones, who may or may not have taken steroids, but nonetheless is a fucking great fighter. And he was talking about when in his first fight with DC, he was just out at dinner and I was sitting at the table next to him, and he was talking about he's imagined every worst case scenario and he's accepted all of those worst case scenarios and he's not afraid. And
Yeah.
he came out like a man possessed in that fight and was just fighting free and fluid, and obviously did what he did and retained the title. But yeah, it's interesting because I think there is that surrender and acceptance even in situations where you think you got to fight. Like a fighter's got to like hold on really tight. But when I'm talking with the champions in any sport and any athlete, it's kind of a release and an acceptance, to the possible outcomes that might be there, that ultimately allows that freedom, because it allows you to be in the present moment. And the present moment is where you're fast. It's where you think the best. It's where you get access to information and instincts. Maybe it's a smell. You can smell that tiger's asshole up there on the tree. But if you're obsessing about, worrying about things, you're not going to be able to smell or hear or
this dude
taste.
Going to invent fire before me, that motherfucker.
Yeah, exactly. He's going to steal my woman because she's going to be warm at night because I can't make this fire, and then the fucking cat gets you. When meanwhile, you could have been hearing the rustling on the bark and the, smell of that feline butt. And you could have been okay. So I think, in some ways, like, we have this idea that there's some situations you got to really hold on tight. But for the most part, when you're doing anything effectively, you're surrendering in some way to the present moment, to your own power, to your own training, to your own everything. And I think that's a really good thing to remember, that even when you're in a fight, there's an element of acceptance and surrender that actually allows you to be a better fighter.
Absolutely. I mean, and I see that as a performer too, is the times where, sometimes I'll have to audition for something and almost invariably, sometimes the extra kick, helps, but almost invariably I'm more tight. But then there have been times where I'm auditioning and let's say it has to be I'm doing stand-up. It has to be a clean set. I can't swear. And I say fuck early on. And then I'm like, all right, well, I'm out of contention for this. And then I can relax and it goes so much better.
Yeah.
It's that, so I mean, I think part of the challenge is even when the stakes are high, being able to surrender. It's easy to surrender when the stakes are low. You're trying to perform something. But I think when the stakes are high, there is that, because it is counterintuitive, but I agree, you're going to do your best if you actually do let go and trust the training, trust, all the subconscious material that's there, everything that you've worked on up to that point.
Surrender and not caring are different things too. So I agree with you. Like the stakes high surrender is like more of a true surrender because you have resistance. You can't surrender to not resistance. So if you're like blase, 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 I don't really care. That's not really surrender because you didn't have pressure. So you didn't have anything to accept. So it's just kind of like neutral. But there's real power when there is pressure.
When you do care.
When there's pressure and that force of resistance, and then you surrender to that force, like that's where there's real power. And that's where you can catalyze that into something beautiful. I mean, that is the muse, right?
Yeah. Yeah, where you're just channeling. And I think the world we live in, though, I mean, I'm talking about this a bit in the new show I'm writing too, where we talk about being in our bodies now. I wonder if that phrase existed, even 100 years ago, because I feel like when you lived in a world of existential threats, of saber-toothed tigers, you had to be in your body. You couldn't just be up here. You couldn't. The people who were up here, they didn't make it.
Right.
And even more recently, I mean, even if you worked in an office 30 years ago, you needed a file. You'd get up, you'd walk down the hall, you'd pick up a physical file, you'd page through it. You'd just be more engaged with your bodies. Whereas now, for most of us, it's, our fingers or our thumbs, basically. And I think that plays into just getting more and more trapped in here.
Yep.
And it's,
fully integrated humans.
Yeah.
Boom.
That's the goal.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
Well, shit, man.
Yeah.
It's good to have you come by.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
You're still touring the Mushroom Cure, and then you got a new show coming out in January, huh?
I'm going to be launching a new show, probably called The Uncertainty Principle. I'm not certain about that. But it's in San Francisco in January, about kind of a sequel to the Mushroom Cure. I mean, not exactly, but just very open as to what's going on with me now, and as well as the fact that I feel like the challenges that we're facing, or one of them is, this desire, this conflict between the human desire to know for security and certainty, and the fact that we don't know what the fuck is going on.
We don't know shit.
Yeah. So, and then
you can surrender to that too.
Yeah.
It's beautiful, man. Well, I'll tweet out some of the dates and stuff.
Cool.
That
you're
touring, and hopefully people will jump in and see it. That'd be great. Hopefully I can catch a show too.
Yeah.
Cool.
Great catching up with you, man.
Yeah.
Likewise, good
brother.
to see you're doing well. And
thank you, man. Yeah. Everything is going good.
Good.
All right. Take care, everybody. See you next week.